Josko Vardiol, Trent Alexander-Arnold, and Malo Gusto. What do they all have in common? Well, we're going to get into that in this video, and I'm going to tell you why Malo Gusto may well be Chelsea's most valuable player and is their most important player.
First game of the season against Manchester City, Gusto started at right back and was actually providing width on the right, with Cole Palmer starting at right wing but drifting inside into that central right half space pocket. Now, this was the first game of the season, and we did see Caicedo, Lavia and Enzo all together in the midfield, so it was a bit different to what we've seen for the rest of the season continuing on from that point. These were the sorts of positions that Gusto was able to take up, and Cole Palmer was drifting slightly infield to receive the ball in deeper areas in the midfield. The problem with this is being able to pin the opposition fullback, and we'll touch on that in the tactics board later on. Next up, you have the one that we've seen most often this season, which is Gusto inverting from that right-back role into more of that DM role alongside Caicedo. Now again, some people have had their issues with this, but I think he's done that role fairly well, especially in terms of recovery ability and in the counter-press. But it's these areas of the pitch that he finds himself in, where he can receive the ball, turn out, play forwards, and it's only now that Romeo Lavia has come into the side that we're starting to see Gusto used differently again. So, Romeo Lavia comes into the team. What's the next option for Enzo Maresca? It is putting Gusto at left back with Reece James at right back and inverting Gusto higher up the pitch in a number 8/10 position, but in the left-hand side pocket. Picking up areas like this, free, behind the opposition press, looking to receive the ball and attack the last line of defence from those central areas and get the ball out wide to those 1v1 wingers. But then lastly, you have Gusto inverting from the right back position into that right half space, little pocket of space, with Reece James starting at left back. The reason for this? Well, getting Lavia and Caicedo in the pivot while still retaining Colwill as the central centre-back. And it was these pockets of space that he found against Manchester United but wasn't able to capitalise on, just because it was one of his poor days at the office where his touch wasn't in, and essentially, for technical quality, it was one of his worst games in a Chelsea shirt, especially this season.
So let's have a look at it on the tactics board then. So you've got Malo Gusto over here. I'm going to put the pen, let's put it in light blue so we can use it. Malo Gusto over here, and we've put him in red because I want to highlight how his movements changes the platforming of the entirety of the team. So obviously, the one at the weekend that's getting the most sort of traction is him playing in this inside right pocket. This is, of course, to ensure that, one, Colwill stays as the central centre-back. Two, you can get both of these players in the pivot. And three, you can still have two nominal 1v1 threats out wide. So by having Gusto in this position, you can have Colwill central, these two in the pivot, and keep your nominal wide threats, which is important to note because each manager is different. But one of Maresca's key principles is he wants these players to be out-and-out wingers who can provide that 1v1 threat out wide every time they get the ball and create those chances themselves by driving into the box or down the byline and beating their man 1v1 without support. So that's an important factor of this, without support. Because now we can talk about the other options that we've seen for Gusto this season, which we did just touch on. But another option that many people want to see is this one. Sakabin Kunku. Now, what does this one still allow? It still allows Colwill in the central centre-back, so good. This, of course, this could be Kukurea, because a lot of people would prefer it to be sort of natural in that sense. Still allows for the double pivot in here. Good. Gets these two players inside, which is very good, something people want to see. But you lose one of the things that we spoke about, which is what Maresca wants in those 1v1 threats out wide, who can do it on their own without support. We know that this worked last season, and it can work in certain games. But the key reason for me that this doesn't work, and I'll tell you now, is that when Chelsea are looking to pin teams in, Palmer is often already making that movement inside. He would have to, with Palmer, pin the opposition fullback in this position whilst Chelsea are building up play to be effective. Maresca's wingers are often the ones that are higher up on the pitch. Jackson is more likely to drop into these spaces. So you'd actually have these two in central areas to receive. It's not saying that Palmer couldn't come in and receive, but what Maresca obviously wants is these fullbacks to be pinned so they cannot push up into these areas to apply pressure to the team. By doing this, Palmer isn't as involved in the build-up as you'd like. He's also not as a direct runner. So into this space, he's clever with his movement and he could easily do it, but he's not quite got the athleticism as, say, a Madueke, a Neto, even a Mudryk when he can do it, to make those runs at fast pace and get Chelsea in behind by being direct. What you'd prefer Palmer to be doing is dropping into these gaps and receiving the ball. By doing this, Gusto would have to be pinning the fullback from early in the possession. One, that's not going to happen because in the early build-up phase, Chelsea want to play in that sort of 4-2 with Gusto a bit deeper. And then he can invert after that, like is what he has been doing. Or in this case, he would have to go and push on up here. So if we get rid of all of this, that would then leave Chelsea far more vulnerable because Gusto is having to pin from the get-go to the point where players are just out of position and Chelsea are leaving themselves with a big gap to fill. Fofana can do it, but it's just, I don't think it's optimal. And like I said, the wingers is a massively important factor for Maresca, especially with the pin and stretch. If you don't know what I mean by this sort of pinning the fullbacks, go and watch the Maresca video on my channel where we sort of did a deep dive into his tactics before he even joined Chelsea, because I think that explains it perfectly in that video. The other thing to sort of note with Gusto, as again we touched on, is when he plays in these pockets, he is technical enough to play in there. He plays like a number 10. So when he's playing on this side of the pitch, and you have Palmer there, where is he? Madueke here. This is also something we've seen this season with Gusto in the left pocket. And again, if this could be Reece James on the right side, sure, there's an argument to be made that Reece James has got a better shot, better passing selection, slightly more sort of experienced in that sense of decision making. And we know what Reece James can sort of apply in that final third. But it's the fitness to do everything. And that's what Gusto's so good at. He can get into these areas. He can counter press in here. He can get back into the middle of the pitch. He can retreat to his fullback position, all being very athletic, and it just works for the team really well. So as we said earlier, he's a platformer. And by doing this, he is able to platform for other players, the 1v1 wingers, Colwell in his right position, the pivot. Even the likes of Jackson, there was a game not long ago where Jackson dropped in. It was actually Gusto that made the run into here. Again, people will say that's not optimal, but for Maresca's side, runners in behind, it's less sort of nitpicky on who it can be. What's more nitpicky is who's going to hold the width and be in those positions to take advantage of the overloads that Chelsea are trying to gain. And Chelsea want that to be these types of players. So that is how, and that is why Gusto is played in this role. So the options that we've got, like I said, are the overlapping fullback, the inverting into the eights, or inverting them into the pivot, which worked well. And I think it still works well, but a lot of people also had a problem with this. The problem is then the other pivot player would have to push into here. Now, that is absolutely fine, but people want Caicedo and Lavia. So again, you have to make a sacrifice. If you want Caicedo and Lavia starting in here for extra physicality, then Gusto pushing forward into these areas isn't an issue. And just to end it off with the Gusto point, before I sort of use a few other team examples, people saying that they want this to be, where's Lavia? They want it to be like this, and they just want to turn Gusto. I'll just take Gusto out, and we want Felix in there. Of course, like I know people are just talking, they're just seeing it as this position on screen as the 3-2-5, but that just doesn't work because where is your right back? Like out of possession, you have to, when you're feeding into these decisions, you have to think on both sides of the ball. Now, the obvious option, and a lot of people will say this in the comments straight away, and I know this because I've said it before myself, the option that you can then make is Caicedo inverting into midfield. That is how you can fix this to get two pocket players that are more natural pocket players. However, one, you've got two right backs that are just so good in Gusto and Reece James that it would be crazy to drop them both and not have them playing in the first team, if that's what you want to call it. But let's put Caicedo in there just for the just for the sake of it. He's inverted from here into here. Now, out of possession, that would then mean Chelsea are pressing something like this, in that sort of 4-1-4-1. You've now still got the issue that Maresca highlighted of central physicality of now you've just got the 1-6 in there because Casado's now having to cover this area. He's out wide. And your two players in here, one of them's going to push on, probably Palmer, because he's been doing that well with Jackson as a 2. So now you're left with Felix, essentially, when Chelsea drop into a 4-4-2. Felix is your other midfielder. So that's where that issue stems from. And I understand people wanting to see this, but I think it's every game is different. And I think that what we need to understand is, especially against a team like Manchester United, quite good in transition, they're going to offer those sort of threats. You have to realise why the decisions are being made. And that, for me, is why the Gusto decisions are being made, because he platforms the entire team and he's so valuable on and off the ball due to the quality and the athleticism and everything that he has. To end this off, I'm going to try and quickly show a few other examples of this. Because one of them is Josko Vardiol for Manchester City. And again, we've seen this. So let's say this is Foden on another day. Foden playing off the left. He's going to cut inside. He's going to drift in. Vardiol is going to hold the width. That's something we've seen for Manchester City. And again, he's platforming for other players. Yet Diaz is the central centre-back. Walker can stay back. He doesn't have to provide width. You still get Savinho providing width. Foden gets to come into his more natural central position. He can push forward. And these movements make sense for the team. And that's all because you can still get the width from Vardiol. And he's good enough to do so. But then, what you've also seen, we took this back to Doku. What we've also seen quite a bit this season is this. Again, this is when Rodri wasn't injured, things like this. But the point stands, and even with Rodri injured, like they're still doing things like this with Vardiol, is he can then push into this pocket because he's good enough on the ball. He scores some good goals from this area of the pitch as well with long shots. So that does help. If Gusto was doing that, I don't think there'd be anywhere near as much outrage if he was scoring from those sort of positions. But he's platforming to have 1v1 wingers. Diaz in the centre. Still keep this pivot. Silva can push forwards and apply more in this number 10. So he's platforming for other players. And even another step forward with Vardiol is he can then also just become the left centre-back. So say this was, just put it the other way around, just for example, and say this is Rico Lewis. And this is where I'm going to have a brain fart, and I can't remember what Lewis's number is, so I'm just going to leave it blank. But let's put it like this, or however you want to put it. Lewis can come into midfield. Both of these guys can push forward. And Vardiol can be here. This allows Lewis to be in the position that he's better. And again, sometimes he'll push forward and that'll make it sort of a 3-1-6. But Lewis in central areas, better for him. Still 1v1 wingers. These two get to play in still their optimal sort of up and down box-to-box roles. And this all stems from how Vardiol was platforming the rest of the team. But let's do it for another team then. Let's do it for Liverpool. Let's do it. We're going to have to change him to blue. Let's do it for Trent and how Slot plays. Now, often, Trent, and this one's really interesting, right? Because Salah and Trent, they've always had that sort of link-up that's quite instinctive. And it's good that they've played with each other for a while because they understand how each other are going to play. Because then what you'll see is Trent's position often will actually be sort of in this zone here. That was an awful circle. But again, this defence will spread into a 3. Trent will eventually make his way up into this pocket. You'll see this sort of pivot in here. Jones will push into here. And Trent finds himself in this space. Brilliant space for Trent, of course, but keeps the width. Good for Salah because he's got that sort of connection in there. Gets the best sort of indication of the back 3, how it can be. You get a bit of protection in the double pivot, which you need in Liverpool because they don't necessarily have an out-and-out number 6. This player can then push into this pocket as well. And again, you've platformed the team correctly for how they want to play. But then what's more interesting about this is because you've got this sort of relationship already built out here between these two, is during the game you'll see moments where Salah goes central to play as basically a second striker at times. In which case, Trent takes the initiative to come out here and he's now holding the width. But with them, it's not a game-to-game sort of decision. It is more so minutes in the game. So rather than one game Trent playing as the width holder and one game Trent playing as the pocket player, what you'll see is during the landscape of a game, it will change multiple times. So by doing this, again, what do you get? Salah gets to come more central. Jones still gets to play in here. McAllister can even push up if this is an aggressive sort of formation. And you can sort of see that 3-1, and it's almost like a 4-2. But Salah, again, he'll be in these half spaces, and then he'll make those runs into there. So what you'll get from Liverpool is these really good movements between these two and counter movements. And that is Trent platforming again for other players. And last season, you saw him platforming as a inverted centre back, as an inverted fullback, sorry, into the middle of the pitch. And it was actually McAllister, or well, at the time it was, that'd be Soboslai, wouldn't it? Oh, number 8, isn't he? And it would be more like this. So again, by having Trent here, you get his passing ability and a little bit of extra control. You still get the back three in an optimal sort of positioning. Get the width out wide, get the players you want. You get to get these players into the pitch in central areas, which he's not been in the best form, but that is where you want Soboslai, in a more attacking area to attack the box, and he can be a bit free to sort of receive the ball in here. And again, same for Jones or whoever on the other side. Didn't mean to get rid of him, but the point stands. Again, Trent is a platforming player. I could do this for the other teams, but we're running out of time in this video. You could do this for Ben White at Arsenal. You could do this for Timber. You could do this for Calafiori. And then at Brighton, one that I did want to touch on really quickly is Jack Hinchelwood. He does the exact same thing. He can play anywhere on the pitch, and he platforms the other players better. You can get Matoma into wide areas. You can get him to drift inside at times if Estepinan's going to provide width on the left. Jack Hinchelwood can actually start in midfield or start at right back, and he's even started at left back. And again, he's another example of that platformer. And I think these players, in terms of the importance they have on the team, really go under the radar. So with Malo Gusto, that is what I'm getting at in this video of why he is one of Chelsea's most important players, especially whilst Reece James isn't able to do the same role. We could be having this conversation about Reece James very soon because he is that exact same type of player that can do it all. But for now, Malo Gusto is one of Chelsea's most, and if not the most important player for Maresca's Chelsea.